My wife told me I was too embarrassing to bring to her birthday. I didn't argue or beg. I left the house while she got ready. When she came home drunk and happy, I was already gone. But before I begin, please like and subscribe to the channel. And we'd love to hear which part of the world are you joining us from. Let us know. Now, let's dive into today's story. Ash Hollow was the kind of river town where everyone knew your business before you did, where families gathered at the First Methodist Church every Sunday morning and held grudges that outlived the people who started them. The Missouri River curved past the old grain silos on the east side, and Main Street still had a working diner that served breakfast all day. People stayed because leaving felt like betrayal, and newcomers were regarded with polite suspicion until they proved themselves, which could take a decade. Edward Mercer had lived there his entire life. 38 years of watching the same streets, the same faces, the same predictable rhythms. He'd inherited his father's practical nature, steady hands, quiet competence, and a tendency to notice things others missed. He worked as a project manager for a regional construction firm, the kind of job that required attention to detail and the ability to see problems before they became disasters. That Sunday in late September, Edward stood at the propane grill behind his split-level house, watching smoke rise from the burgers. The afternoon heat had finally broken, and the air smelled like cut grass and charcoal. His parents sat at the picnic table 20 feet away, their voices low but sharp. His mother kept adjusting the napkins on the table, folding and refolding them while his father stared at the fence line like it held answers. Edward flipped a burger and heard his mother's voice carry across the yard. "I'm just saying what everyone else is thinking." "Then maybe everyone should mind their own business," his father replied. Edward knew they were talking about Karen. They'd been married for 6 years, and somewhere in the middle of year 4, things had started to shift. Small things at first. Dinner conversations that fell hollow, weekends spent in separate rooms, a distance that grew so gradually he couldn't pinpoint when it started. The sliding door opened behind him, and Karen stepped onto the deck. She wore white jeans and a navy blouse, her blonde hair pulled back in a way that made her look younger than 35. She was scrolling through her phone, smiling at something on the screen. "How long until food?" she called out without looking up. 10 minutes, Edward said. She glanced at him briefly, then back at her phone. "Jolene's running late." She texted. Jolene was Karen's younger sister, loud, opinionated, and convinced that her retail management job made her an expert on everything from real estate to marriage counseling. Edward had learned to tolerate her, mostly by staying quiet. Karen walked over to the picnic table, her phone still in her hand. Edward's mother looked up, forced a smile. "Karen, honey, can I get you something to drink?" "I'm fine, Mrs. Mercer." Karen sat down, her thumbs moving across the screen. "Just finishing up some work stuff?" Edward watched his father's jaw tighten. Work stuff. That phrase had become Karen's excuse for everything. Late nights, weekend trips to the office, the constant notifications that lit up her phone at all hours. 20 minutes later, Jolene arrived in her silver SUV, the bass from her stereo audible before she even parked. She stepped out wearing oversized sunglasses and carrying a bottle of wine that probably cost more than she could afford. Sorry, she announced, walking across the lawn. Traffic was insane. There was no traffic in Ash Hollow. There never had been. Jolene kissed Karen on the cheek, waved at Edward's parents, and ignored Edward entirely. She poured herself a glass of wine, took a long drink, and launched into a story about a difficult customer at work. Karen laughed, too loud, too bright, like she was performing for an audience. Edward brought the burgers to the table, set down the platter, and sat at the far end. His mother passed around potato salad while his father carved into his burger in silence. "So, Karen," Jolene said, leaning back in her chair, "you still doing those late-night meetings?" Karen paused, fork halfway to her mouth. "It's a busy season, I'll bet." Jolene grinned, her tone teasing. "Karen's got more of a nightlife than you, Edward." The words hung in the air like smoke. Edward looked up slowly. Karen was smiling, not embarrassed, not defensive, just smiling. "Someone has to keep the bills paid," Karen said lightly, glancing at Edward for half a second before turning back to Jolene. Edward's mother set down her fork carefully, the sound of metal against ceramic too loud. His father coughed, reached for his water. Jolene kept talking, oblivious or uncaring. Honestly, I don't know how you do it. I'd be exhausted. You get used to it, Karen said. Edward ate mechanically, tasting nothing. He noticed the way Karen's phone sat face down beside her plate, the way she kept checking her watch, the way she laughed at Jolene's jokes but barely looked at him. He noticed a lot of things lately. The way she stopped inviting him to company events, claiming they were boring or just coworkers. The way she corrected him in front of her family, like he'd said something wrong when he hadn't said anything at all. The way she told him he wasn't social, wasn't fun, wasn't enough. After dinner, while Karen and Jolene sat on the deck drinking wine, Edward helped his mother clear the table. She scraped plates into the trash, her movements tight with restrained anger. "You deserve better than this," she said quietly. Edward stacked plates in the dishwasher. "It's fine. It's not fine." His mother turned to face him, her eyes fierce. "Everyone can see it, Edward. Everyone except you." "I see it," Edward said. His voice was calm, almost flat. "I see everything." His mother touched his arm, squeezed once, then let go. That evening, after everyone left, Edward sat on the back deck watching the sun drop below the tree line. Karen was inside, still on her phone, her laughter drifting through the screen door. He thought about the last time they'd had a real conversation, not logistics or schedules, but something genuine. He couldn't remember. The air grew cooler. Crickets started their nightly chorus. Edward stayed outside until the sky turned dark and the first stars appeared. Inside, Karen was already asleep or pretending to be. Edward lay on his side of the bed, staring at the ceiling, and felt the weight of silence pressing down like a physical thing. 2 weeks later, Karen stood in their bedroom, getting ready for her birthday dinner. She'd been talking about it for days, a reservation at some upscale restaurant in St. Louis, an hour's drive from Ash Hollow. Edward had assumed he'd be going with her until that afternoon, when she'd casually mentioned it was just co-workers. Now, at 6:30 in the evening, she stood in front of the mirror applying lipstick while Edward sat on the edge of the bed, lacing his work boots. "You're not actually planning to come, are you?" Karen asked. Her tone was light, almost conversational, like she was asking about the weather. Edward looked up. "You said 7 o'clock. I said 7 for my dinner." Karen turned, lipstick in hand. "Edward, it's my co-workers. You don't really fit in with them." The words were delivered with a practiced ease, like she'd rehearsed them. Edward pulled the laces tight on his left boot, tied them off. "Okay," he said. Karen paused. She'd been reaching for her earrings, but now she stopped, looked at him in the mirror. That's it. You're not even going to argue?" Edward stood up, grabbed his wallet from the dresser. "What will be the point?" Karen turned fully now, confusion crossing her face. "I thought you'd be upset." "Why would I be upset?" Edward's voice was calm, measured. "You're having dinner with coworkers. You're right. I probably wouldn't fit in." He walked toward the door, heard Karen's breath catch behind him. "Where are you going?" she asked. Out. Out where?" Edward stopped at the doorway, looked back at her. She was standing in the middle of their bedroom in a black dress he didn't recognize. Makeup perfect, hair styled. She looked like a stranger. "Does it matter?" he asked. He left before she could answer. The drive to his brother's place took 15 minutes. Wes lived on the north side of town in a small ranch house with a detached garage that he'd converted into a workshop. The porch light was on when Edward pulled into the driveway, and he could see Wes through the living room window, watching television. Wes opened the door before Edward knocked. "Figured you'd show up," Wes said. He was 2 years younger than Edward, broader in the shoulders, with the same quiet intensity their father had. He stepped aside, let Edward in. The house smelled like coffee and sawdust. Wes worked as a Finnish carpenter, and he brought his projects home more often than not. Edward sat at the kitchen table while Wes poured 2 cups of coffee, black, no sugar. They sat in silence for a while. Outside, a dog barked. A car passed on the street, its headlights sweeping across the wall. "How long you gonna wait before you say it?" Wes finally asked. Edward stared into his cup. The coffee was too hot, but he drank it anyway. "She's seeing someone," Edward said. Wes nodded slowly, like he'd expected this. "Mom thinks so too." That hurt more than Edward anticipated. The idea that his mother had seen it, that she'd been carrying that knowledge around, worried about him while he pretended everything was fine. How long has Mom thought that? Edward asked. Couple months, maybe. She didn't want to say anything unless she was sure. Wes leaned back in his chair. You know how she is. Doesn't like to gossip. This isn't gossip. No, Wes agreed. It's not. Edward set his cup down, rubbed his face with both hands. His wedding ring caught the light, gold, simple, a little scratch from 6 years of wear. There's something else, Wes said. His voice was careful now, like he was approaching a wounded animal. She's been borrowing against the credit line. Edward looked up sharply. What? Dad noticed it last month when he was helping you guys with the refinance paperwork. Karen added another draw. Told him it was for work clothes, that she needed to look professional for meetings. Edward felt something cold settle in his chest. The credit line was tied to the house, their house, the one they'd bought together 3 years ago. It was supposed to be for emergencies, for home repairs, not for whatever Karen was spending money on. How much? Edward asked. $8,000. Edward stared at his brother. $8,000. Gone. For work clothes. Why didn't Dad tell me? He wanted to. Mom talked him out of it. Said it wasn't their place, that you'd figure it out when you were ready. Wes leaned forward, his elbows on the table. But I'm telling you now because you need to know what you're dealing with. Edward nodded slowly. His mind was already working through the implications, the shared accounts, the joint credit, the mortgage. Karen hadn't just cheated on him. She'd involved their financial stability, their future, the foundation they'd supposedly been building together. Thanks for telling me, Edward said. What are you going to do? Edward stood up, walked to the window. Outside, the street was quiet. A porch light flickered 3 houses down. Somewhere in the distance, a train whistle sounded, low and lonesome, heading south along the river. I don't know yet, Edward said. But that was a lie. He already knew. He just wasn't ready to say it out loud. He stayed at Wes's place until midnight, then drove home. Karen's car was in the driveway, the house dark except for the porch light. Edward went inside, walked past the bedroom where Karen was sleeping, and lay down on the couch in the living room. He stared at the ceiling, listening to the house settle around him. He was done pretending. The next morning, Edward woke early. His neck hurt from sleeping on the couch, and his back felt stiff. He made coffee, drank it standing at the kitchen counter, and left for work before Karen woke up. At the office, he went through the motions, reviewed blueprints, answered emails, attended a meeting about material costs. His coworkers noticed his quietness, but didn't comment. Edward had always been reserved, steady. They mistook his silence for concentration. During his lunch break, Edward sat in his truck in the parking lot and made 3 phone calls. The first was to his bank. He opened a separate checking account in his name only, arranged for his direct deposit to be rerouted starting next pay period. The second was to the family attorney, a man named Richard Gaines who'd handled his parents' estate planning. Edward made an appointment for the following week. The third call was to his father. I need to talk to you about the credit line, Edward said. His father was quiet for a moment. Wes told you. Yeah, I should have said something sooner. It's okay. Edward watched a sparrow land on the hood of his truck, peck at something invisible. I need to know exactly what Karen has access to. Everything financial. Can you help me with that? I can. His father's voice was steady, reliable. Come by tonight. Bring your paperwork. Edward spent the rest of the day organizing. He went home during his afternoon break and quietly gathered documents, bank statements, credit card bills, mortgage papers, tax returns. He found receipts Karen had left in her desk drawer, charges for restaurants he'd never been to, hotel stays in cities he'd never visited. He photographed everything with his phone. That evening, he went to his parents' house. His mother hugged him at the door, held on longer than usual. You're doing the right thing, she said. In his father's office, they spread the paperwork across the desk. His father put on reading glasses, went through each document methodically. He made notes in a small notebook, his handwriting precise. She's been careful, his father said after an hour. Nothing too obvious, but it's there if you know where to look. Edward leaned against the wall, arms crossed. What am I looking at? Cash withdrawals. Always just under $500, so they don't flag automatic alerts. Charges to places you've never been. This hotel in Clayton, you ever stay there? No. It's billed as a work expense, but it's not on the company card. It's on your joint account. His father looked up over his glasses. She's paying for something. Or someone. Edward felt the anger then, sharp and clean. Not the hot rage that made people do stupid things, but the cold kind. The kind that sharpened focus. Keep going, Edward said. They worked until 9 o'clock, building a timeline. Karen's late nights started in March. The cash withdrawals began in April. The hotel charges in May. $8,000 on the credit line in July. By the time they finished, Edward had a clear picture of exactly what Karen had been doing with their money. What's your next step? His father asked. Document everything. Separate finances. File when I'm ready. His father nodded. You need help, you call me. Anytime. Edward drove home slowly, taking the long way past the river. The water was dark under the half moon, and the old bridge lights reflected on the surface like scattered coins. He thought about Karen, about the woman he'd married 6 years ago, and tried to remember when she'd changed. Or maybe she'd always been this way, and he'd just been too blind to see it. At home, Karen was watching television in the living room. She looked up when he came in. Where were you? She asked. Dad's place. Helping with some paperwork. Oh. She turned back to the screen. There's leftover pasta in the fridge if you're hungry. Edward stood in the doorway, looking at her. She was wearing sweatpants and one of his old t-shirts, her hair in a messy bun. She looked comfortable, relaxed, like everything was normal. Thanks, Edward said. He went to the bedroom, changed clothes, and lay down on top of the covers. Karen came in an hour later. She got ready for bed without speaking, turned off the light, and climbed in on her side. In the darkness, Edward could hear her breathing. Slow, steady, already falling asleep. He stayed awake, his mind working through the details. He wasn't angry anymore. Anger required caring, and something inside him had shifted. He felt clear, focused. Karen had made her choices. Now Edward would make his. The affair wasn't dramatic. That was the worst part. If it had been explosive, passionate declarations, risky behavior, something cinematic, Edward might have felt justified in his anger. But it wasn't like that. It was mundane, predictable, the kind of thing that happened in small towns where people got bored and made stupid decisions. The man was Trent Waller. Edward had heard the name before. Ash Hollow was too small for true anonymity. Trent worked with Karen at the regional supply office, a sprawling warehouse complex on the outskirts of town that serviced construction companies across 3 counties. He was divorced, 42, with a reputation for living beyond his means. Edward had seen him once at a company picnic 2 years ago, standing near the beer cooler in expensive sunglasses and a polo shirt that looked tailored. Karen had introduced them briefly. This is Trent. He's in logistics. They'd shaken hands. Trent's grip was firm, practiced. He'd smiled and said something forgettable about the weather. Now, sitting in his truck outside the supply office on a Wednesday afternoon, Edward watched Trent walk across the parking lot to his car, a black Dodge Charger with chrome rims that probably cost more than his monthly rent. Trent moved with confidence, keys spinning around his finger, phone pressed to his ear. Edward had taken the afternoon off work, told his supervisor he had a dental appointment. Instead, he'd driven to Karen's office and waited. He wasn't following them, wasn't confronting anyone. He just needed to see it, needed to confirm what he already knew. Karen emerged from the building 15 minutes later. She was laughing, looking down at her phone. Trent's Charger was parked 3 spaces away. Edward watched as Karen glanced around the parking lot. A quick, furtive look, then walked over to Trent's car. Trent rolled down the window. They talked for maybe 30 seconds, Karen leaning down, her hand resting on the doorframe. Then she smiled, straightened up, and walked to her own car. Edward started his truck and left before either of them noticed him. That evening, he acted like nothing had happened. He came home, made dinner, asked Karen about her day. She told him it was busy, stressful, lots of inventory issues. She ate quickly, barely tasting the food, and spent the rest of the evening on her laptop in the bedroom. Edward cleaned the kitchen, then went to his workshop in the garage. He'd been building a bookshelf for his mother. Oak, hand-joined, meticulous. He measured twice, cut once, sanded the edges smooth. The work required focus, precision. It kept his hands busy and his mind clear. Around 10 o'clock, his phone buzzed. A text from Wes. "You good?" Edward typed back. "Yeah, making progress. Let me know if you need anything." Edward set the phone down and went back to work. The saw hummed. Sawdust collected on his boots. Outside, the night was quiet except for the distant sound of traffic on the highway. He didn't confront Trent. He didn't threaten Karen. He didn't do any of the things people expected from betrayed husbands in small towns where everyone was watching. Instead, Edward quietly separated their finances. He moved his paychecks into the new account. He stopped contributing to the joint account beyond his agreed-upon share of the mortgage. He documented every transaction Karen made: the restaurants, the hotels, the cash withdrawals. Late at night, when Karen was asleep, Edward would sit at the kitchen table with his laptop and go through their credit card statements. He created spreadsheets, tracked patterns, noted dates and times. He found charges for jewelry he'd never seen her wear, dinners at expensive restaurants in St. Louis on nights she'd claimed to be working late, a weekend stay at a bed and breakfast in Hermon when she'd told him she was at a conference. He saved everything, printed copies, made backups on a thumb drive he kept in his truck. To anyone watching, Edward looked like a man trying to save his marriage. He was polite to Karen. He didn't pick fights. He asked about her day and listened to her complaints about work. He played the role perfectly. Karen mistook his silence for weakness. She grew bolder, less careful. The late nights became more frequent, the excuses more transparent. She stopped trying to hide the text messages, would sometimes smile at her phone right in front of him. One evening in late October, Edward came home to find Karen packing a small overnight bag. "Going somewhere?" he asked. "Team building retreat. I told you about it last week." She zipped the bag, checked her reflection in the mirror. "We're staying overnight at some resort near Lake of the Ozarks." Edward had checked the company calendar that morning. There was no retreat scheduled. "When will you be back?" he asked. "Tomorrow afternoon." "Late." "Okay." Karen paused, studying him. "You're really okay with this?" "Why wouldn't I be?" She shrugged, picked up her bag. "I don't know. You've just been different lately." "Different how?" "Quiet. More than usual." She walked past him toward the door. "Anyway, I'll see you tomorrow." Edward watched her leave. He heard her car start, saw the headlights sweep across the living room wall as she backed out of the driveway. He waited 5 minutes, then called the resort she'd mentioned, asked if they had a group booking for her company. "No, sir," the receptionist said. "No corporate events this week." Edward thanked her and hung up. He spent that evening at Wes's place. They watched a football game, drank beer, didn't talk about Karen. But when Edward was leaving, Wes walked him to his truck. "You're handling this better than I would," Wes said. "Am I?" "Most guys would have lost it by now." Edward leaned against the truck, looked up at the sky. The stars were bright, the air cold enough to see his breath. "Getting angry doesn't change anything," Edward said. "She's going to do what she's going to do. I can't stop her, but you can protect yourself." "Yeah." Edward opened the truck door. "That's exactly what I'm doing." The family divide started small, like hairline fractures in concrete, barely visible at first, but spreading. Karen's mother, Patricia, moved in during the first week of November. She claimed it was temporary, just helping out while Karen was so busy with work. But Edward knew the real reason. Patricia was there to provide cover, to make sure Karen's stories held up, to create a buffer between Edward and the truth. Patricia was a formidable woman, 63 years old, sharp-eyed, with opinions about everything and the confidence to share them. She'd never particularly liked Edward. He was too quiet, too simple, not ambitious enough for her daughter. Now, with implicit permission to interfere, she made her presence felt. The first evening Patricia was there, Edward came home from work to find her rearranging the kitchen. "This organization makes no sense," she announced, moving coffee mugs from one cabinet to another. "How do you find anything?" "We manage," Edward said. "Well, you'll manage better now." She waved a hand dismissively. "Go wash up. Dinner's almost ready." Edward went to the bedroom. Karen was there, changing out of her work clothes. "You could have warned me," Edward said quietly. "About what?" "Your mother moving in." Karen pulled a sweater over her head. "It's temporary. She's helping out." "Helping with what?" "With the house. With me." Karen turned to face him. I'm stressed, Edward. Work is crazy right now. I need support. Edward looked at her. She met his eyes without flinching, her expression carefully neutral. He wondered if she believed her own lies or if she just didn't care anymore. Fine, Edward said. He grabbed clean clothes and went to take a shower. Over the next 2 weeks, Patricia made herself comfortable. She cooked elaborate dinners that Edward didn't ask for. She reorganized the linen closet, the garage, the hall bathroom. She watched daytime television at high volume and left her book club materials spread across the dining room table. And she criticized Edward constantly. You should help Karen more with the yard work. You really ought to dress better for someone your age. Karen tells me you don't have many friends. That's not healthy. Edward took it silently. He came home, ate dinner, retreated to the garage or the guest bedroom. He didn't argue, didn't defend himself. Patricia's presence was temporary. Everything was temporary now. One evening, Edward was sitting at the kitchen table reviewing paperwork when Patricia sat down across from him. She had a glass of wine in her hand, her reading glasses perched on her nose. You need to loosen up, she said. Her tone was casual, almost friendly, but her eyes were sharp. Karen needs more from a husband. Edward looked up from his papers. More what? Energy. Enthusiasm. You're so. She waved her hand vaguely. Dull. Karen's vibrant, social. She needs someone who can keep up with her. Edward set down his pen. Is that what Karen told you? She doesn't have to tell me. I can see it. Any mother would. I see. Edward gathered his papers, stood up. Thanks for the advice. Edward, I'm trying to help. I know exactly what you're trying to do. Edward's voice was calm, but there was steel underneath. And it's not going to work. He left before she could respond. Later that week, Karen snapped at him in front of her mother and Jolene. They were all in the living room, the women drinking wine, Edward reading a book in the corner chair. Jolene was telling a story about some coworker drama when she mentioned Edward. I bet Edward doesn't have to deal with office politics, Jolene said, laughing. Edward doesn't deal with much of anything, Karen said. Her voice was light, teasing, but the words cut. Edward looked up from his book. What's that supposed to mean? He asked. Just that you're not exactly a people person. Karen took a sip of wine. You embarrass me around my family, Edward. You just sit there like furniture. The room went quiet. Even Jolene looked uncomfortable. Patricia watched with interest, her wine glass tilted in her hand. Edward closed his book slowly. He stood up, walked to the doorway, then turned back. You're right, he said. I should probably give you all some space. He grabbed his jacket and left. That sentence, you embarrass me, sealed it. Not because it was cruel, though it was, but because it was honest. Karen had finally said what she'd been thinking for months, maybe years. She was embarrassed by him, ashamed. He wasn't enough. Edward drove to the river, parked near the old boat launch where he used to fish with his father. The water was dark, moving slow. He sat on the hood of his truck and called the attorney. Richard Gaines. Richard, it's Edward Mercer. I need to move the timeline up. How soon? Edward watched the river. A barge moved upstream, its lights reflecting on the water. Soon as possible. I'm ready. I'll draft the papers tonight. You can review them this weekend. Thank you. Edward hung up. He sat there for another hour, listening to the water lap against the shore, feeling the cold November air settle around him. When he finally went home, the house was dark. Patricia had gone to bed. Karen's car was in the driveway, but her bedroom door was closed. Edward slept on the couch. It was becoming a habit. Karen didn't come home the night after her birthday. Edward knew she wouldn't. The pattern was predictable now. Big events, birthdays, holidays, long weekends were opportunities. Karen would manufacture an excuse, stay out late, sometimes overnight. She'd done it for Thanksgiving 2 years running, claiming Black Friday work emergencies. She'd done it on their anniversary last year, saying her boss needed help with inventory. This time, she didn't even bother with an excuse. She'd gone out Friday evening, dressed like she was going to a club, tight jeans, a burgundy top that showed more skin than seemed reasonable for November. Edward had been in the garage working on his mother's bookshelf when she'd poked her head in. I'm heading out, she'd said. Edward had looked up from sanding. Where to? Dinner with friends. Don't wait up. Which friends? Just some people from work. She'd smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. I'll be late. Edward had nodded, gone back to his work. That was 11 o'clock Friday night. Now it was 8 in the morning on Saturday, and Karen still wasn't home. Edward made coffee, drank it standing at the counter. Patricia was already up, sitting at the table in her bathrobe, reading the newspaper. "Karen still out?" she asked without looking up. "Seems like it. She works so hard. Probably stayed at a friend's place rather than drive home tired." Edward poured a second cup of coffee. "Probably." He went to his home office, a small room off the living room that he'd converted 2 years ago, and closed the door. The filing cabinet in the corner held everything he needed. He pulled out the folder labeled Divorce and spread the documents across his desk. Richard Gaines had done excellent work. The petition was thorough, detailed, unambiguous. It requested dissolution of marriage on grounds of irreconcilable differences. It outlined asset division based on Missouri law, equitable distribution, not necessarily equal. It included a financial disclosure showing Karen's unauthorized use of marital funds. Most importantly, it included a request for exclusive temporary use of the house, which would almost certainly be denied given that both names were on the deed. But Edward wasn't asking for the house. He was documenting that Karen had made their shared home uncomfortable through her behavior in her mother's presence. Edward signed the documents. He'd already scheduled a courier for Monday morning to serve Karen at her office. But first, he wanted her to see the papers at home. Wanted her to understand, in private, that this was real. He placed the documents in a large manila envelope, sealed it, and wrote Karen's name on the front in block letters. Then he waited. Karen came home at noon. Edward heard her car in the driveway, the engine shutting off, the car door closing. He was sitting in the living room reading, deliberately visible. Karen came through the front door looking disheveled. Makeup smudged, hair messy, clothes wrinkled. She froze when she saw him, her keys hanging from her hand. "You're home," she said. It was an accusation, not an observation. "I live here," Edward replied. She set her purse down, ran a hand through her hair. "I stayed at Jolene's. We had too much wine, so I crashed there." Edward didn't respond. He just watched her, his expression neutral. "What?" Karen said. "Why are you looking at me like that?" Edward stood up, picked up the manila envelope from the coffee table. He crossed the room and handed it to her. "What's this?" she asked. "Open it." Karen stared at him, then tore open the envelope. She pulled out the documents, scanned the first page. Her eyes moved quickly at first, then slower. Her face went pale. "You can't do this," she said. Her voice was barely above a whisper. "I already did." "Edward, this is—" She looked up at him, and for the first time in months, he saw a genuine emotion in her eyes. "Fear. You're filing for divorce?" "Yes." "Why?" The question was so absurd that Edward almost laughed. "You're asking me why? We can work this out. Go to counseling." "I'll—" "Read the financial disclosure," Edward interrupted. Page 6. Karen flipped through the pages, her hands shaking. When she reached page 6, she stopped. The color drained completely from her face. The disclosure listed every charge, every withdrawal, every expense she'd made with their shared money. Hotels, restaurants, cash advances, $8,000 from the credit line. All dated, categorized, documented. "You've been tracking me," she said. "I've been protecting myself. This is insane." Karen's voice rose. "You can't just spy on your wife and then—" "I didn't spy. I reviewed our shared financial accounts, which I have every legal right to access." Edward's voice was steady, calm. "Everything in that disclosure is accurate. You spent marital funds on an extramarital affair. The court will find that relevant." "There's no affair," Karen said quickly. Too quickly. Edward just looked at her. "You don't understand," Karen said. She was crying now, tears running down her face, her makeup smudging further. "It's not what you think." "Then what is it?" She opened her mouth, closed it. No words came. Edward walked to the door, paused with his hand on the knob. "You'll be served officially on Monday at your office. I recommend you contact an attorney." "Edward, please. I'm staying at Wes's place for a few days. Your mother can keep you company." He left before she could say anything else. In his truck, Edward sat with his hands on the steering wheel, breathing slowly. His heart was pounding, adrenaline flooding his system. But underneath the physical response, he felt something else. Relief. It was done. No more pretending. No more silence. No more watching Karen destroy what they'd built together. He started the engine and drove to Wes's house. His brother opened the door, took one look at Edward's face, and stepped aside. "You told her," Wes said. "I told her." They went to the kitchen. Wes poured coffee, even though it was afternoon and neither of them needed caffeine. They sat at the table in silence. "How'd she take it?" Wes asked. "She tried to deny it. Then she tried to bargain. Then she cried. And you?" Edward wrapped his hands around the coffee mug, felt the warmth seep into his palms. "I feel clear, like I've been carrying something heavy and finally set it down." Wes nodded. "Good. That's good." Edward's phone buzzed. A text from Karen. "We need talk." Then another. "Please come home." Then a third. "I'm sorry." Edward turned the phone face down on the table. "She's going to keep trying," Wes said. "I know." "You going to answer?" Edward thought about it. About Karen standing in their living room holding divorce papers, finally understanding that her choices had consequences. About Patricia, who would probably be on the phone right now calling relatives, spinning the story to make Edward the villain. About Jolene, who'd probably known about Trent all along and said nothing. "No," Edward said. "I'm done talking." He spent the weekend at Wes's place. He helped his brother with a cabinet project, watched football, ate takeout. His phone kept buzzing, texts from Karen, then from Patricia, then from numbers he didn't recognize. He didn't answer any of them. Sunday evening, his mother called. "I heard," she said. "Are you okay?" "I'm fine, Mom. I'm proud of you." Her voice was firm, fierce. "You did the right thing." "Thanks. Your father wants to talk to you." "About the house." Edward switched the phone to his other ear. "What about it?" "You're both on the deed. Both liable for the mortgage. You need to decide what happens with it." "I know. Richard's handling it." "Good." A pause. "Edward." "Yeah. Don't let her guilt you into changing your mind. This is the right thing. You know that, don't you?" Edward looked out Wes's kitchen window at the dark street beyond. Somewhere in town, Karen was probably crying. Patricia was probably plotting. Jolene was probably posting vague, sympathetic messages on social media. He felt nothing. "I know, Mom," he said. "I'm not changing my mind." The legal process moved faster than Edward expected. Richard Gaines was efficient, precise, and utterly unsentimental about the whole thing. "Marriage is a contract," Richard explained during their meeting on Tuesday morning. "When one party breaches that contract through infidelity and financial misconduct, the dissolution is straightforward. Missouri is a no-fault state, so we don't technically need to prove the affair, but the financial component changes the equation." They were sitting in Richard's office, a modest suite above the hardware store on Main Street. The walls were lined with law books that looked like they'd actually been read, and the desk was organized without being sterile. Edward sat across from Richard with a folder full of documentation. "The credit line withdrawal. Can we get that back?" "We can request it." Richard leaned back in his chair, fingers steepled. "Whether the court orders restitution depends on whether we can prove the money was spent on non-marital purposes. Your documentation helps, but we'll need to show a clear pattern." "I have a pattern." Edward spread out the papers. Bank statements highlighted in yellow, credit card bills with suspicious charges circled, a timeline he'd created showing Karen's spending correlated with her late nights and unexplained absences. Richard studied the documents with the careful attention of a surgeon examining an X-ray. After several minutes, he looked up. "This is thorough. Very thorough." He tapped one of the bank statements. "The cash withdrawals especially. Always under 500, always on Fridays. That's deliberate." She was trying to avoid triggering automatic fraud alerts. "Can we use that?" "Absolutely." Richard made notes on a legal pad. "The court doesn't like financial deception. It suggests intent to hide assets or expenditures. Combined with the hotel charges and restaurant bills, we can make a compelling case that she spent marital funds on an affair." "What about Trent Waller?" Richard looked up. "The other man? He's got debt. I did some checking. He filed for bankruptcy 3 years ago, bounced checks at the local credit union, and his ex-wife sued him for unpaid child support." "How'd you find all that?" "Public records and small-town gossip." Edward allowed himself A thin smile. Turns out a lot of people in Ash Hollow don't like Trent Waller. Richard leaned forward, interested now. Are you suggesting Karen was supporting him financially? I'm suggesting the $8,000 from the credit line didn't go to her clothes. Richard was quiet for a moment, thinking. Then he nodded. I'll file a motion to compel financial records. If Karen used marital funds to pay Waller's debts, that's relevant. The court will want to know. How long until the hearing? Missouri requires a 30-day waiting period from the date of service. Given the complexity of your assets, the house, the retirement accounts, the joint debts, we're looking at 60 to 90 days for a full hearing. But we can request temporary orders in the meantime. Like what? Exclusive use of the house, temporary support, restraining orders on shared accounts. It protects you while the case is pending. Edward thought about Patricia, still camped out in his guest bedroom. About Karen, who'd been calling him nonstop since Saturday. About the house that no longer felt like home. I don't want the house, Edward said. She can have it. I just want the equity settlement to reflect what she owes. You sure? That house is worth $200,000 at least. I'm sure. I'll get half the equity minus what she owes me. That's fair. Richard made a note. All right, I'll draft the temporary orders. Anything else? She's going to fight this. Most people do. I mean, really fight it. Her mother's involved now. They'll hire an attorney, try to drag this out, make it expensive. Richard set down his pen, gave Edward a level look. Edward, I've been practicing family law in this county for 20 years. I've seen every tactic, every manipulation, every attempt to delay or obfuscate. Your wife can hire the best attorney in St. Louis, and it won't change the facts. She used marital funds improperly. She had an affair. The documentation is solid. A judge will see through any smokescreen. So we're good. We're very good. You did the hard part, gathering evidence, protecting your assets, maintaining your composure. Now let me do my job. Edward left Richard's office feeling strangely calm. He'd expected the legal process to be overwhelming, adversarial, exhausting. Instead, it felt mechanical, clinical, like a necessary surgery, painful but ultimately healing. Karen hired an attorney from St. Louis. Edward found out from Wes, who heard it from their mother, who heard it from a friend at church whose daughter worked at the law firm. The attorney's name was Monica Priestley, and she had a reputation for being aggressive in divorce cases. She specialized in what she called defending women's interests, which meant she fought hard for alimony, asset division, and portraying her clients as victims. Edward wasn't worried. The first indication of Monica's strategy came 2 weeks after Karen was served. Edward received a certified letter at Wes's address, a formal response to the divorce petition along with a counterpetition. Karen was asking for spousal maintenance, half of Edward's retirement account, 60% of the house equity, and reimbursement for emotional distress. Edward handed the papers to Richard. Emotional distress? Edward said, she's claiming I caused her emotional distress? Richard scanned the document, his expression unchanged. It's posturing. They're trying to establish a narrative where you're the bad guy. Cold, distant, emotionally unavailable. They'll claim Karen's behavior was a response to your neglect. That's insane. It's strategy. Monica Priestley likes to flip the script, make her clients sympathetic. Doesn't mean it'll work. Richard set the papers down. We respond with your evidence. Every hotel charge, every late night, every dollar she spent on Trent Waller. The truth doesn't care about narratives. What about the spousal maintenance request? Missouri law requires maintenance when one spouse lacks sufficient property and income to meet their reasonable needs. Karen has a job. She makes decent money. Unless she can prove genuine financial need, the request won't hold. And the retirement account? That's marital property, subject to division. But we'll argue for an unequal split based on her financial misconduct. You'll get more than half. Edward nodded. When do we respond? 30 days. I'll draft a reply addressing each claim point by point. In the meantime, don't contact Karen directly. All communication goes through me. That won't be a problem. The twist came in early December. Edward was at work reviewing a material shipment when Richard called. We got lucky, Richard said. Really lucky. How so? Remember when I filed the motion to compel Karen's financial records? The court granted it. She had to turn over her bank statements, credit card bills, everything. And it turns out Trent Waller isn't just her boyfriend. He's her financial dependent. Karen's been paying his rent, his car payment, even his credit card bills. We're talking thousands of dollars over the past 6 months. Edward sat down slowly. How much? Conservatively? 15,000. Maybe more. The 8 from your credit line, plus regular transfers from your joint account. She was basically supporting him. Jesus. It gets better. Trent has a court judgment against him from his ex-wife. Unpaid child support, $10,000 in arrears. Karen paid $5,000 of it in September. Edward felt cold rage settle in his chest. She paid his child support? With your money, yes. Can we get it back? We can try. More importantly, this destroys her credibility. She can't claim emotional distress when she was actively diverting marital funds to her boyfriend. The judge will see this as financial infidelity, and that matters in asset division. Edward stared out the window of his office trailer. Outside, construction workers moved lumber, operated forklifts, shouted instructions to each other. Normal work, normal day. While his wife had been systematically stealing from him to support another man. What's the next step? Edward asked. We file an amended petition showing the additional financial misconduct. We request full restitution, $23,000 plus interest. And we argue for an unequal property division heavily in your favor. Do it. Edward, I should mention, this is going to get ugly. When we present this evidence, Monica is going to attack your character. She'll paint you as vindictive, controlling, obsessive. She might even claim you're making this up. Let her. You're sure. Edward thought about Karen, about the woman who'd stood in their bedroom 6 years ago and promised to love him, honor him, build a life together. About the woman who'd lied, cheated, and stolen from him while her mother rearranged his kitchen cabinets. I'm sure, Edward said. Present the evidence. The divorce hearing was scheduled for mid-January at the county courthouse in Clayton. Edward drove there with Richard, the winter morning cold and overcast. They arrived early, went through security, and waited in a small conference room while other cases were heard. The courtroom was smaller than Edward expected. No jury box, no dramatic wood paneling like on TV. Just a simple room with a judge's bench, 2 tables for the attorneys, and gallery seating for observers. Karen was already there when Edward entered. She sat at the left table with Monica Priestley, wearing a dark blue dress and minimal makeup. She looked smaller, somehow diminished. When she saw Edward, her eyes filled with tears, but she didn't speak. Patricia was in the gallery, along with Jolene. On Edward's side sat his parents, Wes, and a few family friends. Judge Marianne Chun presided, a woman in her 50s with reading glasses and a no-nonsense demeanor. She reviewed the case file while the attorneys approached the bench for preliminary discussions. Then, the hearing began. Richard presented Edward's case methodically. He walked through the timeline, Karen's late nights, the unexplained expenses, the credit line withdrawal. He presented bank statements showing transfers to Trent Waller. He showed receipts for hotels, restaurants, even jewelry. Monica objected frequently, claiming the evidence was circumstantial, that Edward had spied on Karen, that the financial records were taken out of context. Judge Chun overruled most of the objections. When it was Monica's turn, she tried to paint Edward as cold, controlling, emotionally distant. She called Karen to the stand. Karen cried. She talked about feeling lonely, neglected, unappreciated. She claimed Edward had stopped communicating, stopped trying in the marriage. She said the money she'd spent was her own, from her own earnings. Richard cross-examined carefully. Mrs. Mercer, did you or did you not pay Trent Waller's rent in July using funds from your joint account with Mr. Mercer? Karen hesitated. I helped a friend who you were having an affair with? I wasn't. Mrs. Mercer, did you stay overnight at the Riverside Hotel in St. Louis on August 14th? Yes. Was Mr. Mercer with you? No. Who paid for that room? I did. With which credit card? Karen's voice was barely audible. The joint card. Richard didn't grandstand. He just let the facts speak. The hearing lasted 3 hours. Judge Chun called a brief recess, then returned with her decision. "I've reviewed the evidence and heard testimony from both parties," she said. "This is a straightforward case of marital dissolution complicated by financial misconduct." She looked at Karen. "Mrs. Mercer, you used marital funds that belonged equally to you and your husband, to support an extramarital relationship. Whether you characterize this as an affair or a friendship is irrelevant. You diverted shared resources without your spouse's knowledge or consent. That constitutes financial infidelity." Monica started to object, but Judge Chun raised a hand. "I'm granting the divorce on grounds of irreconcilable differences. As for asset division, I'm ordering the following. The marital home will be sold, with proceeds divided 60-40 in Mr. Mercer's favor. Retirement accounts will be split 70-30 in Mr. Mercer's favor. Mrs. Mercer will repay $23,000 to Mr. Mercer over 24 months at 3% interest." Karen gasped. Patricia stood up in the gallery, but the bailiff gestured for her to sit. Judge Chun continued. "The request for spousal maintenance is denied. Mrs. Mercer is employed and capable of supporting herself. The request for emotional distress damages is denied. This is a civil proceeding, not a tort case." She looked at both parties. "This marriage is dissolved. You're both free to move forward with your lives. I suggest you do so without further contact. Court is adjourned." The gavel came down. Edward walked out of the courthouse into the cold January air. His parents hugged him. Wes clapped him on the shoulder. Richard shook his hand and said, "That went well." Behind them, Karen emerged with Monica and Patricia. Karen was still crying. Patricia was talking rapidly, gesturing angrily. Jolene had her arm around Karen's shoulders. None of them looked at Edward. He climbed into his truck and drove back to Ash Hollow alone. The sky was gray, heavy with the promise of snow. The river looked dark and sluggish as he crossed the bridge. Edward had sold the house 2 weeks ago. A young couple with a baby had made an offer. Asking price, no contingencies. Karen had signed the papers without argument, her attorney probably telling her not to fight a losing battle. Edward had already rented a small apartment near downtown. 1 bedroom, clean and simple. No memories, no ghosts. He'd moved in last weekend with help from Wes and his father. His furniture fit easily. He didn't own much, had never been attached to material things. That evening, Edward sat in his new living room with a cup of coffee, watching snow begin to fall outside the window. His phone buzzed. A text from his mother. "Proud of you. Come for dinner Sunday?" Edward smiled, typed back. "I'll be there." Another text came through. Unknown number. "Edward, it's Karen. Can we talk?" Edward stared at the message for a long moment. He thought about everything that had happened. The lies, the betrayal, the months of silent suffering. He thought about the woman he'd married and the stranger she'd become. He blocked the number. Then he deleted every photo of Karen from his phone, every text message, every reminder of the life they'd shared. Not out of anger, out of completion. 3 months later, Edward sat on Wes's back porch, helping his brother prep lumber for a new deck. It was early April, and the weather had finally turned. The air smelled like fresh-cut grass and possibility. "Heard Karen's moving to Kansas City," Wes said, measuring a board. "Good for her," Edward said. Jolene told Mom. Said Karen got a job transfer, wanted a fresh start. Makes sense. Wes looked at his brother. "You really don't care anymore, do you?" Edward set down the saw, wiped sawdust from his hands. "No, I don't. That was fast." "Was it?" Edward thought about it. "I stopped caring the night she told me I embarrassed her. Everything after that was just logistics." Wes nodded, went back to measuring. Edward's phone buzzed. He pulled it out, saw a text from a number he didn't recognize. "This is Trent. We should talk." Edward almost laughed. He showed Wes the message. "What are you going to do?" Wes asked. Edward deleted the message, blocked the number. "Nothing. There's nothing to talk about. You don't want to tell him off? Let him know what you think." "Why? He knows what he did. So does Karen. They have to live with that." Edward picked up the saw again. "I'm done carrying their guilt." They worked in comfortable silence for a while, the spring sun warm on their backs. That evening, Edward hosted Sunday dinner at his apartment, a small gathering with his parents, Wes, and a few family friends. His mother brought her famous pot roast. His father told old stories about working construction in the 70s. Wes made everyone laugh with an impression of their high school principal. Edward sat at the head of the table, a simple folding table he'd picked up at a yard sale, and felt something he hadn't felt in years. Peace. Not happiness, exactly. He wasn't ready for that yet. But peace. The kind that comes from knowing you did the right thing, even when it was hard. The kind that comes from protecting yourself without losing yourself in the process. His phone stayed in his pocket, silent. Karen tried to call twice more over the next month. Both times, Edward's phone blocked the number automatically. He never heard it ring. He didn't follow her on social media. Didn't ask about her. Didn't wonder what she was doing or who she was with. She'd made her choices. He'd made his. The karma wasn't dramatic. There were no explosive confrontations, no public humiliations, no revenge served cold. Karen lost her security, her standing in the community, her family's respect. She lost the house, most of the retirement savings, and the comfortable life she'd taken for granted. But she'd lost something more important, the chance to hurt Edward ever again. Edward didn't win in the traditional sense. He didn't gloat. He didn't post cryptic messages online or badmouth Karen to mutual acquaintances. He simply rebuilt, quietly, deliberately, with the support of family who'd always had his back. He started taking woodworking classes at the community college, joined a rec league softball team, had coffee with a woman he met at the hardware store, though nothing came of it. He wasn't ready yet, but he would be. Eventually, summer arrived, hot and humid the way Missouri summers always were. Edward finished his mother's bookshelf, oak, hand-joined, with 3 shelves and decorative corbels he'd carved himself. He delivered on a Sunday, helped his father install it in the living room. His mother filled it with family photos, old books, and small mementos from trips taken years ago. She stood back, admiring it. "It's beautiful, Edward," she said. "Thanks, Mom." She looked at him, her eyes searching. "Are you happy?" Edward considered the question. Was he happy? He wasn't sure, but he was free. Free from lies, from betrayal, from the weight of a marriage that had become a prison. "I'm getting there," he said. And that was enough. On a warm evening in late August, Edward sat on his apartment balcony with a beer, watching the sun set over Ash Hollow. The river caught the last light, turning bronze and gold. Swallows dipped and dove over the water, catching insects. His phone sat on a table beside him, silent. No call from Karen. No text from Trent. No drama. No crisis. No chaos. Just silence. The good kind. Edward raised his beer in a quiet toast to himself, to survival, to strength, to the simple dignity of walking away with his integrity intact. Then he took a long drink and watched the day end, grateful for the peace he'd fought so hard to earn. The karma hadn't been dramatic. It had been final, and that was better than any revenge could ever be.